35 and a little bit of feedback.
That was me.
Oh, okay. Okay, we okay then? And this is Tuesday, December 16th, 2025, and this regular meeting of the Sandpoint Planning and Zoning Commission is now called to order in the council chambers at City Hall, 1123 West Lake Street, Sandpoint, Idaho. And for the record, I am the vice chair. Chair Mose Dunkel is not showing up yet, so I'm filling in at this moment. And I will be presiding until he does show up. And also present are Commissioners Grant Simmons, Reed Weber, Scott Torpy, and we got William Mitchell here too. So if everyone would please stand, we will recite the Pledge of Allegiance.
That's okay.
I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, do the commission members have any announcements or reports at this time? Okay, hearing none. The consent, excuse me. We will now proceed with the consent calendar and at this time, I will entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar as presented.
Motion to approve.
It's been moved.
Second.
Seconded. Any other discussion? Okay. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion has passed. Okay, matters for the public and general public comments. Next, we will proceed with matters for the public, and if you would like to speak on a topic pertinent to city business that is not included on the agenda, now is the opportunity to do so. If you wish to speak and haven't yet completed a sign-up form, please do so and hand it to staff. The forms are located on the table by the doors. If you are attending remotely and wish to speak on matters that is not on the agenda, please raise your hand on Zoom at this time. Is there anybody on Zoom?
We have no one signed up to speak.
Okay, thank you. I would like to make everyone aware that the city does have a policy on public meeting decorum. The rules are posted on the wall just outside the chamber entrance doors. In summary, I would ask that everyone please be pleasant and respectful, not make derogatory statements about others, including city staff, not be disorderly and disruptive, not calling out, clapping, or holding up signs, etc. Please note that the commission cannot take testimony on any subject, planning or land use related matter or application outside of an official public hearing. As there are public hearings on the agenda this evening, please hold testimony on these matters until after the hearing is open. At this time, is there any general comments on topics not included on the agenda and for comments only? No questions or debate. Do we have anybody from the agenda?
Nobody signed up to speak.
Okay, thank you. So nobody signed up to speak. That will conclude the general public comment portion of the meeting. Now, public hearing, next on the item. Excuse me. The public hearing recommendations to amend City Council Code Title III, Chapter 12, short-term rental of dwelling units. And if you wish to speak, please sign up again to hand it to staff, because this is not a quasi-judicial hearing. If there are any members of the public on Zoom who wish to speak, we will take remote testimony on this matter. We will begin with the staff presentation followed by commissioners' questions. Then we will open the hearing for public testimony. After the public hearing has been closed, we will proceed with commission deliberation and a recommendation decision. I will now yield the floor to Community Planning and Development Director Jason Welker.
Thank you, Vice Chair Benner. And I For the record, I did just hear from Chair Mose Dunkel, and he will not be able to join us tonight. Thank you, commissioners and members of the public. We are back about 1 month, actually 4 weeks to the day from our last public hearing on our short-term rental ordinance at the city of Sandpoint, Title 3, Chapter 12. Unlike most of the code sections that this commission hears, this is not a zoning section of our code. Rather, this is under the licenses and permitting and business operation section of our city code. But given the connection to land use and the impact on our residential neighborhoods, we determined it was appropriate to hold this hearing and kind of work through some of the challenges with short-term rental regulations with the Planning and Zoning Commission before this body makes a recommendation for amendment to City Council. So rather than going into the same PowerPoint I gave you a month ago, we're just going to do a quick recap of the reason we're here, and then we'll talk about the changes that we've implemented in the 4 weeks since we held our first public hearing on this issue. So the background here is that we are in a environment in which the state legislature has for 2 years in a row now contemplated changes to state code that would further strip cities' abilities to regulate short-term rentals. But the reality of the existing state law around short-term rental regulations is that our city code is in violation of state law as it is currently written. And the language of state code allows only for the regulation of short-term rentals to the extent that we are protecting the integrity of residential neighborhoods and assuring life safety, such as fire extinguishers and CO2 detectors and things like that. What state code expressly prohibits is prohibitions on the operation or the operation of short-term rentals of any form. As you recall from our presentation a month ago, this year and late last year, there have been 2 court cases, one at the Idaho Supreme Court, one at the District Court, that have challenged other resort cities' regulations of short-term rentals through their own local ordinances. The one that really made it apparent that we needed to address our ordinance was that against the city of Lava Hot Springs, which is a resort community, very small resort community in southeastern Idaho, with, as you can imagine, a beautiful hot springs that draws thousands, if not tens of thousands of visitors in the summer. Lava Hot Springs had a regulation very similar to ours, which prohibited non-owner occupied short-term rentals in the residential zones in Lava Hot Springs. Commercial zones, unlimited operation of short-term rentals allowed, same as Sandpoint. We do not limit or regulate the operation of short-term rentals beyond just those simple permit requirement in our commercial zones, but we have a hard cap of 35 non-owner occupied short-term rentals in our residential zones. We do not cap owner-occupied short-term rentals. So if you have a mother-in-law apartment or an ADU or a spare room, or if you perhaps have a condo up on Schweitzer that you go to on the weekends and you want to rent your house in town on weekends, you're allowed to do that without any cap on the number of owner-occupied short-term rentals. But in speaking with our legal counsel at the city and reviewing the decision by the Idaho State Supreme Court in Lava Hot Springs, it became obvious and apparent that our cap of 35, which essentially allows only 1% of our housing stock to be operated as short-term rentals, is a de facto prohibition on short-term rentals, considering 99% of property owners are deprived of the right to operate a short-term rental in the property that they own. Furthermore, over the summer, there was an affordable housing committee, a statewide committee chaired by Senator Woodward and Senator blanking on his name from Redmond out of Coeur d'Alene, that met in these chambers as part of their Idaho State tour. And there was a representative from the Idaho Vacation Rental Association here, which is a lobby group down in Boise funded by Airbnb, that from that podium right there indicated their intention to sue the city of Sandpoint over our own local ordinance. So we were put on notice that we would be next. We determined that the responsible thing to do would be to address our known deficiency in our codes through a reasonable amendment. And in so doing, we decided to look more closely at our short-term rental regulations and see what we could do to bolster our protection of neighborhood character and integrity. And that was one of the really fruitful outcomes of last month's public hearing. We heard from many members of the community, and the Planning and Zoning Commission gave us direction to come back with an amendment that brought in a definition of neighborhood integrity. So we've done that in this updated version. So that's a little background. That's how we got here. I'm going to put up a couple slides, and then we can look at the redlined version of the amendment, the ordinance. You can ask any questions, and we'll open up a public hearing, and we'll take it from there. So let me share my screen, and I'll get my presentation up here for you. So we're going to focus. Here's the amended ordinance itself, but I'm going to actually pull up my continuing PowerPoint and share a slide that basically focuses on what has changed since the last version. So what did we change since the November 19th hearing? Commissioner Reimar, who's unfortunately not here tonight, he had some really good input a month ago. He really believed that if we're going to have an ordinance that protects this idea of neighborhood integrity, we should probably define neighborhood integrity. So we went around and around with several different versions of a definition, and this is what we kind of settled on. So neighborhood integrity for the purposes of this STR ordinance is the condition in which residential areas function in a manner consistent with their intended character and density, such that short-term rental activities do not generate impacts such as noise, traffic, parking, congestion, or public nuisance beyond those normally associated with lawful long-term residential use. And we believe this is very much in line with what the state has in mind when it describes protecting neighborhood character and integrity. We can regulate STRs insofar as they do not create undue nuisances or burdens on neighborhoods beyond what either long-term rentals or owner-occupied housing create. So that's really what we tried to get at with this definition. Another pretty significant change is the transition from a conditional use permit for the HSTRs. Why am I blanking right now? What's this? The high occupancy STR. Sorry. For some reason, I thought there should be an O in there, but that'd be weird. A hoster. It's an HSTR, high occupancy STR, which was defined as a short-term rental advertising for 11 or more guests. And there is a precedent in other Idaho cities for requiring additional permits for high occupancy STRs. Bill and I discussed following last month's meeting and determined that the best option for that permit would be not a conditional use permit, which we require for all sorts of conditional uses in our residential zones in Title IX, but a specific high occupancy STR permit that the administration of which will live within Title III, Chapter 12. So rather than referencing administration of a permit that exists in another section of code, we just brought the entire permit structure and administration into Title 3, Chapter 12, the STR ordinance. The HSTR permit process is no less rigorous than that for a conditional use permit. So it requires all the noticing and hearing requirements of a CUP, but it includes some specific performance standards around the operation of a short-term rental, as opposed to referencing kind of the more nebulous performance standards of a conditional use permit. And of course, one of the findings required for the approval of an HSTR permit is the finding that the operation of the STR will maintain the integrity of the surrounding residential neighborhood. Finally, the only other kind of significant change we made since last month is that around parking. We heard from a member of the public at that time about the onerous impact that the proposed minimum of 2 off-street parking spaces would require, basically making several currently permitted STRs unpermittable, because we would be expanding the parking requirement beyond what was required, for example, for an ADU to be built. We require 1 off-street parking space for an ADU, but if an ADU is being operated as an STR, and we said, well, now you have to provide another additional off-street parking space. First of all, there were equity concerns among our own community, but second of all, immediately challengeable by the state law, under state law, because we're now treating an STR differently, which is not allowed under state law, than we would be treating a similar owner-occupied dwelling unit. So the proposal now is that 1 off-street parking space shall be required where 5 or fewer guests are accommodated, 2 spaces for 6 or more guests, and parking will be addressed through the HSTR permit process as a condition of approval. So if a large mansion is advertising 15 or 20 guests, it can be up to the planning commission to determine how many off-street parking spaces are required. So these are the three significant changes since last time. The only other update I have for you is that there has actually been news from Boise as well. So we're coming into the new legislative session here very soon. And while I can't share the actual draft bill with you, I can summarize some of the key points that are being discussed as far as what the Idaho legislature is looking to, or I should say the Airbnb lobby group is looking to advocate the Idaho legislature to change. So there's a draft bill amending Idaho Statute 656539, which establishes what cities can do in terms of STR regulation, and these are the major changes that are being explored. It's the language in the current code says cities may regulate STRs to protect neighborhood integrity as they deem fit. That language is being replaced with cities may regulate STRs to protect neighborhood integrity as described in these two specific bullet points later down. And this is what it establishes basically. It says cities may regulate STRs to require smoke alarms, CO2 detectors, fire extinguishers, and occupancy limits described in the International Building Code. That's it. Second, the other thing the state establishes we are allowed to do, if this bill should be adopted, is employ other reasonable regulations that impose no greater restrictions on STRs than are imposed on dwelling units not used as STRs. The proposed amendment also prohibits cities from requiring STRs to register with the city. In other words, no license, no permits, period. So we would lose most of our current ordinance would have to be stricken in a future amendment if this gets through. So what this means for Sandpoint's STR ordinance, as amended tonight, our ordinance, we believe, is legal under state law. It's defensible under state law. But if the bill passes the legislature in the upcoming session, we will probably be back here in 6 months to bring a dramatically stripped down ordinance with no permits, no performance standards beyond fire and life safety. So just wanted to bring it back to that as well. A lot of members of the public think that we're deregulating STRs here. We are absolutely not deregulating STRs. What we have, if amended tonight, is the strongest STR ordinance in the state of Idaho, but it's one that's defensible under state law. But we might be in a situation early next year where our amended ordinance is not defensible under state law if the Airbnb lobby gets its way in Boise. So I will leave it at that and answer any questions before you open the public hearing. And I'll actually put the redlined version up on the screen in case you have any specific sections you'd like to refer to. The things we didn't go through tonight, because we went through them in great detail a month ago, some of the overall restructuring and streamlining of the ordinance. We've moved performance standards into its own section. We've moved enforcement and violations into their own section. It was all kind of muddled together previously, so we've really cleaned up the organization of the code. Bill, of course, has 30 years of experience doing that work, so he was invaluable with improving just the readability of the code. The other thing that might have changed since last month is this purpose statement. We broke it into these three distinct points. So let me zoom in a little bit. It's a little easier to read. And we really rewrote this purpose. So looking at our old purpose statement here, really hard to say that that's legal under state law. So it referred to by regulating, in private property rights, non-owner occupied short-term rentals within residential neighborhoods, and by regulating all short-term rentals of dwelling units to safeguard the health, safety, welfare, and short-term rental occupants of the neighborhoods. So we've kind of broken that out to explicitly tie to the language in state law. So the purpose of this chapter is to establish reasonable regulations for the operation of short-term rentals consistent with Idaho Short-Term Rental and Vacation Rental Act. So we've actually referenced the act specifically, currently set forth in Idaho Code 63-1801 and 67-6539 in order to safeguard the public health, safety, and general welfare. B, protect the integrity of Sandpoint's neighborhoods by ensuring that short-term rentals have no greater impacts, such as noise, parking, congestion, traffic, and changes to neighborhood character than typical long-term occupancy. And C, support private property rights and preserve housing opportunities for the community. These regulations are adopted pursuant to the city's authority under 67-6539 to protect health, safety, and welfare. So that's the new purpose statement, just more explicitly tying it to state law. Otherwise, any questions you have before we open the public hearing, we're happy to take them.
Well, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. So with that new definition of integrity, with the intention of the neighborhoods, like how do we figure that out, and how do we defend what the intended integrity of a neighborhood was?
Go ahead. That microphone.
Great question. Thank you so much. Jason, I just had this conversation, as we were preparing this final version for your review this evening. Essentially, what the handcuffs are kind of tight, as you just heard from Jason, in terms of what we can regulate and what we can't. So for the purposes of integrity, we're talking about what's the nature of transience between, a short-term operation versus a longer-term operation. And the state really, like I mentioned, it's very difficult because we don't have a lot we can actually regulate. So we're talking about noise, parking are really the two are the main things that we can hone in and identify that we're trying to protect. So the neighborhoods can still function as a neighborhood as opposed to being just a larger grouping of hotels. It comes down to noise and parking are the things that sort of stand out that we can actually address. We already have public nuisance, laws anyway on the books, related to garbage and things like that. But you're talking about, the inconvenience of the comings and goings of a higher transience related to short term than a long term. So for us, it came down to noise and parking, the two things we could hone in on to address that. It didn't make sense for the purposes of the definition to go into areas that we wouldn't specifically be able to deal with our ordinance. So we had to think about what rules we actually had, what tools, what dials we had to turn at our disposal and sort of back into what a neighborhood integrity could be, given the limitations on what we can actually regulate. So we had to look at it sort of in a 360 direction that way, if that makes sense.
Any other
Sure.
questions? Go ahead. Question.
Follow-up question to that. And it kind of gets into the more open question of what neighborhood integrity entails. And at what point does a neighborhood lose its integrity when long-term tenants no longer stay there? I don't have an answer, but it's something that the state seems to definitely be pretty strict about here with this definition. But is there potential to, I don't know, at least quantify where our neighborhoods are at today? And if we literally see them transform over so many years from now and become more of like a purely like vacation only kind of town, what levers would we have at that point to pull back and say this totally ruined the city of Sandpoint? Can we what are our options at that point? Or is that even, I just think it's a concern on a lot of people's minds, is how we're gonna navigate our integrity of our neighborhoods in the future.
I think that's a great point. And when the state is telling us so, loudly and clearly that there's limits to what we can do as a city, because this is a part of the economy they want to see flourish, or for whatever reason it is they're doing it. We struggle to find another way to approach the issue of defining integrity as it relates to short-term rental permitting and licensure and operations. I'm willing to have that discussion with you, but we couldn't think of another avenue to pursue that would lead to some sort of a reasonable regulation besides noise and parking. We kept coming around to what would we regulate? The number of windows in the house? I mean, it's nothing like that. Nothing like that. The architecture of the home. None of that is sort of germane to the conversation. Where those things are germane to the conversation when you're talking about other aspects of what neighborhood integrity means in terms of architectural character and the look and feel as you walk down the street. We couldn't arrive at one such that we could put some rules around it. Mm-hmm. But if you have an idea, now sure would be a good time to explore that. But we really struggled with that.
Mm-hmm. Weber, if I can just remind you of the facts in the Lava Hot Springs case, and this is something that we've been grappling with as well. The city has a population of 358 people. It has over 400,000 tourists a year. More than 25% of the housing stock is for short-term rentals. And the housing prices increased over 262% between 2013 and 2022. So the facts are pretty egregious in that case for what we're trying to protect. And the Supreme Court still unanimously said that they can't prohibit or provide regulations to the point of prohibitions. And so that's just what we're grappling with.
Commissioner?
I'm going to bring this down to a very granular level from the big questions that have been asked already. Under the sections of the proposed regulation that deals with enforcement generally and revocation specifically, in section 4D8, the way there's a list. And I'm unclear whether it has to be all of those things in that list or any one of the first three things plus the fourth and fifth thing. If you see what I mean. You just take a look at under revocation for a high occupancy STR may be revoked following a public hearing before the Planning and Zoning Commission if. Now, in my experience, generally there is either an and or an or after the second to last thing to give you an idea whether it's all of those things. The implication here, because there is no and, is that it is all of those things. But in section 6 later on, subpart 2, it states specifically and more generally for any kind of short-term rental, whether it's high occupancy or a standard, that if there's 3 violations in a 12-month period, that constitutes grounds for revocation. So that suggests to me that you don't need small 2 and small 3 under 8 to revoke a high occupancy short-term rental. You just need one of those 3, it would seem. So that's a point I'm making. I don't know if it makes any sense to you guys. Do you follow what I'm saying?
You're right.
Okay,
It's any one of those.
It's any one of those.
first 3.
Yes, and that's why it's worded without the language that suggests that it would have to be a collection of them all.
I think perhaps a comma in the word and following the end of 3 would clarify this. Because in addition to any of those 3, the property owner must also be notified by mail of the violations and the revocation public hearing.
Yeah, I noticed that 3 has a period at the end. I missed that. So it may be under that structure that you've got 1, 2, and 3 lumped together as all of those. I don't know. I mean,
The intention was any one of them.
Yeah, okay. Well,
And also to your point about whether or not numbers 2 or 3 or any of them for that matter could be removed, part of this also is an attempt to be clear.
oh, I'm not suggesting you remove 2 or 3 at all. No, that was not a
You
suggestion.
don't, okay,
No, it seems like any one of those first 3
Right.
would be grounds for revocation, the way it's written. I mean, the way I read it, but it may not be the way it's literally written because something tells me it might need to be a bunch of other things too. I don't know. So
yeah.
just think about it. Maybe,
I think that's a good read. I think between now and when we move on to city council, should it go this direction, we could put a period, comma, capital and, or there's a way
Yeah.
to make it, to provide that clarity that I think you're bringing up, which is, I think, a great point.
okay. And then I want to go back to the PowerPoint. And I think I just want to make sure I understand it right, that if the law, the proposed legislation that you summarized is adopted by the legislature and there is no, quote, registration of short-term rentals anywhere for any reason, it's just, there it is, you know. How would the city raise the tourist tax? You know, how would I mean, apart from raising money to enforce anything here, how would, doesn't the city raise tax get tax revenue from short-term rentals now?
Yes, and
How would you do that if nobody has to register anything?
so the taxes rarely paid through the registration process. Rather, the platforms that operate and provide services for these short-term rentals collect lodging tax on behalf of the owners. And you've noticed this if you've ever booked an Airbnb. You're not writing a separate check to the owner of the STR. If you've booked a Airbnb before, you're paying it to Airbnb. Airbnb remits that on behalf of the owners. It's already very difficult to track where the tax remittances come from because Airbnb cuts the city a lump sum check a couple times a year for our lodging tax share from operations of Airbnbs and Sandpoint. We don't get a detailed spreadsheet from Airbnb saying how many nights each unit was rented for. It's really gray how that's determined. There's a lot of faith that we put in Airbnb. Another proposed amendment to state law that keep in mind who's funding this lobby effort. It's Airbnb. They're requiring that every STR operated outside of a platform like Airbnb or VRBO has to register with the state tax commission directly, who will collect taxes from the operators of those, and basically further takes that taxing authority out of cities' hands. So currently, there are a handful, we know, because we get checks once in a while from STR operators in town who are not using Airbnb or VRBO. They have their own little website, or they just rent it on Craigslist or who knows, Facebook Marketplace, and they'll bring in their 14% lodging tax check to the city. Another amendment being brought to the legislature is to require that all STR operators register through the state tax commission. Now, this is creating red tape to try to nudge those STR operators onto the platforms. So if you say, well, why would Airbnb care about that? Because they want to make it more difficult for people to operate STRs outside of their platform. So it becomes easier and more streamlined for you just to, pardon my language, forget about it. I'll just join Airbnb and let them take care of the tax stuff for me. So they're proposing the creation of more red tape to make it less appealing for STR owners to operate outside of the Airbnb platform. Okay. So, but back to your question, like without permits or licenses, how would we know, or how would we get our tax revenue? We don't know now. In fact, another question would be, without permits or licenses, how would we know how many STRs there are operated in Sandpoint? Well, in addition to our STR program, we subscribe currently to a very quite expensive subscription online platform that draws from over 40 lodging reservation websites, including VRBO and Airbnb and 38 others, presumably. Booking.com, Expedia, you go on. I mean, I don't know, there's so many places. Google Lodging, you can book from so many different places now. And we get this really cool map of Sandpoint showing dots where all the listed and formerly listed and unlisted lodging is. So short-term rentals. So one argument, we're part of a resort city coalition about 20 different cities around Idaho we have monthly meetings to discuss issues such as this. This is a big issue for all the resort cities in Idaho, and we're lobbying against this effort down in Boise to try to preserve our ability to regulate STRs. One of the kind of unfortunate consequences would be really small cities such as Lava Hot Springs. Now, are they expected to sign up for a $5,000 a year online subscription just to know where STRs are in their town? And they have to take money out of their general fund just to have awareness of who's operated an STR in the town? Because licenses and permits are how most cities, especially smaller cities that can't afford those expensive software solutions, even monitor and track where STRs are. So without licensing, I mean, we have over 200 licensed STRs in Sandpoint right now. And we have, we know exactly where they all are. There are quite a few that aren't licensed in Sandpoint. We have a pretty good idea where they are from our subscription service as well. But you take away the licenses, now there's no, it's fully dependent on either blind faith or you pay for some. Wouldn't it be great if Airbnb owned that online business that tells you where all the Airbnbs are as well?
That's probably next.
If they don't, they will, right?
Yeah. There is no end to their greed and their desire to deregulate. Idaho's being used as a test case right now. This effort's not happening in any other state. They view the Idaho legislature as the most conservative and private property oriented legislature in the state. So they're seeing if they can get complete and total annihilation of short-term rental regulations in the state of Idaho, then they'll move on to all the other states.
Can I ask one more question? And this concerns, there are a number of short-term rentals now that we know of. And if you could just spend a moment and describe for us any enforcement or the prevalence of the need to enforce the rules we have now, and who does that enforcement, and how effective it seems, and have we ever revoked someone's permit? I mean, those sort of things. Just in general, if you could spend a minute and describe the enforcement arena for this, because it seems to me that we can do all we can with these rules, but once the thing is permitted, it's out of our hands until enforcement sort of documents the violations, and then it comes back. But if there's no documentation, if there's no resources or the ability to enforce, then all of the rest of this would therefore not have a great deal of meaning. So go ahead.
Certainly in any code enforcement effort at the city Sandpoint, resources are very scarce. We've had over the last 2 years between 1 and 3 community resource officers who are generally the ones who are tasked with going out and delivering enforcement notices, letters of violation, things like that. So just the manpower right now, we have 2. We're very lucky to have 2. We were down to 1 for a long time. But as far as on the planning staff, we've got our admin assistant Mandy, we have our assistant planner Katie, who's at home on maternity leave right now. But I'd say a reasonable percentage of their time over the last year has been on tracking, monitoring our STR program. Taking permits, reviewing permit applications. The more frequent than revocation of a permit is a permit expires, and this is really only an issue with our 35 non-owner occupied permits, because if your owner occupied permit expires, you just reapply and you get a new one. It's just you just pay your $100, $150, whatever. We make sure you've checked all the boxes. We send our building inspector out to make sure you have fire extinguishers and smoke detectors in all your rooms, things like that. We issue your permit. Good. It's good for another year. If it expires, no big deal. You come back in, you can renew it a month later. The problem is if you're one of the lucky 35 who has a non-owner occupied STR and you wait till the last minute, or you wait until a week after your permit expires and said, oh, shoot. Mandy and Katie have been really good about red flagging those and saying, they'd bring them to Bill or myself and say, this person wants us to extend their permit. It expired. We've already notified the next person on the wait list. So that's more common. Then you get some tension, some friction with, STR operators who have had permits for 5-6 years, and suddenly we say, oh, your permit's expired. You didn't renew it. We've already contacted the next person on the wait list. So you can see the tension that arises there. But as far as like violations in terms of noise or suspected parking violations, it's an entirely complaint-based system. We don't send community resource officers or the building inspector out to, with decibel meters at 10:30 at night measuring the noise coming from
Have we
STRs.
gotten complaints?
If so, they go to the police and the police deal with that. It doesn't come to the planning department, but that would be handled by the police. And then if it makes its way to the planning department and we start recording violations, there's only been one that I've heard of, but it was a big issue. There was a neighborhood that was being particularly affected by what I would describe as a high occupancy STR, but that was before my time here, and I heard that there was an enforcement action taken on that.
Yeah, most enforcement is a complaint-based nature. The complaint comes in, funnels its way to the community resource officers. If it involves a planning and zoning matter, they'll typically come and talk with us. We'll coordinate. Somebody's doing construction without a building permit, that kind of thing. Or if they've put all their roof trusses in the middle of a public road, staging for, construction, things like that. Same with STRs. A complaint will come in and it usually goes to the community resource officers. We'll get involved just to help double check what permits are there, and it's managed that way.
So if the police identify a violation of some code that applies to the revocation standard of 3 violations in a 12-month period, they'll tell the plan. I mean, somebody's got to be keeping track of this, because it's the planning. It's us. It's going to revoke, or you're going to revoke the permit, right? Not the police.
Correct.
Okay.
Unless it's a high occupancy STR, in which case the revocation would I can't recall off the top of my head if that
That's a planning.
rise to the level of going to the planning commission or not, if they have to, be the revoking body or not. But generally, yeah, how we administer, and that can change from, between directors and staff and how we decide to operate and coordinate with the police department. But we stitch it together. It's a group that communicates fairly well, and we take a look at this stuff and we track it. We have permit system to be able to look, help us track
Great.
activity.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Um,
Oh, okay. I got a couple of questions. Jason, could you go back to section 312.4? This is just a cleanup piece that I saw there.
Okay. This is the permit
Yeah.
administration.
Mhm, yeah.
Mhm.
The first line right there, it's talking about application for a short-term, should be rental permit. You got an L instead of
Oh,
a T.
a renal
Yeah.
permit, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll add a T there, thank you.
The other question I have is, it's going to your parking part. And I know a couple communities that struggle with this. What happens when you've got say you're going to have a place that can have 3 families in it? That's 9 people, which falls underneath the lower category. They all show up with their great big pickup with trailers behind them with either watercraft on the back or snowmobiles. Then you do have a parking problem because they're going to take up a good share of a block and could be there for a week's period of time.
True.
And I know, I mean, it's true. And I was,
You live in South Sandpoint, half the parking spaces are taken by boat trailers all summer as is. Yeah.
but anyway, I
But
just,
the fact is, going back to what the state law allows, right? To say a 3-bedroom house that could conceivably have 3 families in it, to require twice as much parking as would be required by a 3-bedroom house next door will be deemed an undue regulation. So tying it back to what we're allowed to do under state law.
no, I know, I'm just bringing it up. I can see that where you're talking about the parking, that probably could become one of the biggest issues, especially summertime when all of a sudden you've got 3 or 4 of homes along one block and they're all coming to enjoy the lake.
Now, if an Airbnb is operating for 3 families, as long as they're not more than 3 people per family, but if it's a 3-4 person families, now you're talking about a high occupancy STR that you all would have the ability to impose additional parking requirements on that.
But you can come in 2 people per vehicle and 2 snowmobiles, or some of those people have 4 snowmobiles depending on what kind of snow conditions you're going to have. So anyway, I just wanted to share.
And another, I mean, when we think about like residential parking requirements, we have residential parking requirements for new construction in Sandpoint, right? But how many, probably hundreds of homes were built before those standards were in place and don't meet the minimum required under our current code? Again, I lived in South Sandpoint for 7 years, and half the houses on my block didn't have more than 1 or 2 maximum off-street parking spaces, where currently there might be 3 or more required. So this is a problem we have, if you want to call it a problem. If people being forced to park on the street is a problem, it's happened. It's a fact of life in Sandpoint. There are at any given time probably 2,000 vehicles parked on the street in Sandpoint. So if there's 200 STRs operating, each of them has 1 vehicle parked on the street, you're talking 10% more cars parked on the street at Sandpoint. So yes, it's a fact. It will happen.
Yeah, I can see that one. Yeah. Any other questions for staff?
One more
Yeah,
question.
go ahead.
So if this new legislation passes, can we even regulate parking at all?
No differently than we regulate it and we're already bringing our parking requirements into line with the new regulation here, because, well, can we regulate parking? If you have a 3-bedroom house that you operate as an STR, we have a parking requirement for 3-bedroom houses. We can't say because it's an STR, there's an additional parking requirement.
Right.
So yes, we can still regulate parking for STRs insofar as the STRs are dwelling units in Sandpoint. We can't treat them any differently than any other dwelling unit in Sandpoint.
What if you have a three-bedroom house on Huron that's got one off-street parking that was built in, 1906?
Oh, you almost had the year right.
Whatever.
Everything else was right.
1918.
But my specific house.
Before the regulations came into effect, can they still operate without the required parking that a new structure would require?
Under our proposed amendment here,
No, with the new legislation, could you still require more, even though like if a single family living in that house might only have one parking spot because it's an old house?
Let's provide the parking.
So you have to harmonize it, is what I mean.
Unless the state tells us.
it's a non-conforming
Yeah,
structure.
yeah. It really depends on what the state comes up with. But today I would say you have to provide the parking.
Currently, yeah, today for sure.
Yeah.
Good though. Right?
Yeah.
So I think we can all think of an example or two where the notion of expanded rights didn't ultimately serve the public interest. You know what I mean? And I don't know if this is one of those or not, but I would argue another one of the bummers of this is how this manifests is on law enforcement, right? They're the ones who are going to get the calls, and then that needs to bubble its way all the way up such that there's enough pressure for folks to call their legislators, et cetera. But in terms of my role as a planning and zoning commissioner, right, this is sort of the role of planning and zoning, is to figure out that balance of where do we butt up against public interest and the notion of individual rights. And so if I understand it, the only backstops we have currently, you've baked into the pudding, right? There's nothing else.
We looked at almost, I'd say at least 8 or 10 other similar resort community STR
Yeah.
ordinances. Keep in mind, the vast majority of cities in Idaho do not have an STR ordinance.
Yeah.
We're talking probably 20 or fewer cities, even less than that, even.
We're
have
not
short-term
other
rental
cities
regulations.
though.
Well, true, but we operate in the same regulatory environment as other
Yeah,
cities, so we have to look at what other
I
cities
get
are
it.
doing. And we drew from other cities to assemble what I can pretty confidently say is the strictest ordinance in the state as amended.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, then we'll go ahead and we'll proceed with the public hearing. The rules stated previously for the public testimony are still in effect. And the public hearing is now open. And Madam Clerk, has anyone signed up to speak? Or are there any hands raised on Zoom?
Our first speaker is Terry Pardini, city resident.
Hi, Commissioners. I'm Terry Pardini. I'm a city resident. I've lived here since 1979, inside and outside the city, but I've been in the city since 2005. First of all, I'm completely in favor of all these additional restrictions and amendments that Jason and the attorneys recommend putting on our ordinance. I do not recommend taking off the cap. I think that if you're trying to protect the integrity of existing neighborhoods, having an infinite number of STRs in any neighborhood is not going to protect the integrity of that neighborhood, no matter how many parking spaces you give them, it just won't. And especially when I believe that Mr. Welker and the attorneys and I have different definitions of prohibit and regulate or restrict. And I would just like to say, after reading the Daily Bee article where Mr. Welker was referenced the decision by the Supreme Court in the city of Lava Hot Springs, the court ruled that the cities could regulate but not prohibit STRs in the city. Zach Jones, the legal counsel, stated, clearly the 35 units that we currently regulate disallows or practically prohibits That's a key word practically because it doesn't prohibit, it regulates. I threw that in, that wasn't his quote. He says, I think it would be difficult to defend. So I decided maybe I just don't understand the difference between prohibit and regulate. So, of course, I Googled it, and everywhere it says restricting sets limits, prohibiting formally forbids something, making it entirely off limits. So I just don't get how they keep going down the road saying if we try to regulate or restrict the number that we have, that we're prohibiting. We are not. Perhaps we need to make more than 35. Maybe that would help with our Airbnb Sue Happy group. But I don't think that we should kowtow to them. I think that we should do what's best for our town, for Sandpoint, and not be afraid of what our sometimes crazy legislature can do, especially when there's a lot of money coming in from corporations such as the Airbnb. I think that we need to stand firm and say, this is what Sandpoint, what we want in our community. And we do not want more than 35 of our STRs, maybe just a little more, but not unlimited. So thank you, and I hope you do the right thing.
Thank you, Terry.
Next, we have Rebecca Holland.
Good evening. Good evening. Rebecca Holland for the record. I live out in Selly Valley, but I've been in the area for 50 years and had a business in town, and I will eventually be living back in town. I'm so glad just to follow Terry. I just want to say I concur with just everything she said. So I would be repeating to go into those points that she made, particularly when it comes to the regulating versus the prohibiting, et cetera. I hope that Sandpoint grows a spine, is what I would say straight up. You know, the whole idea, the state is overreaching. And if you give it, it's going to give it and give it more. Just to share, many years ago, not many, but pre-Stapleton, let's put it that way, I served on a sustainability committee, just trying to get it started. And we were looking at towns where, such as Truckee, California, where plastic bags are bought. And we looked at of creating a system like that here that would be an experimental thing. And there were businesses here, good businesses that wanted to do it. Then the state stepped up and passed a bill, and that was by Sage Dixon, who led the charge on that, and it was all gone. No, you cannot do that, and you know who was funding it all? The plastic industry. So it's always about follow the money. And I think as we are looking at this right now, there is a lot of big money. What started out to be like people adding on some income is now big business. And they're coming in and buying places up, you know, in towns, all the what you guys call the STRs. So I don't know what kind of legal pushback there can be, but I think we should find it. And I think you'd have the people behind you on it. There's at some point you just come to where you just say no. And the state doesn't like the feds telling them what to do. How is it that they think they could be telling the municipalities how they have to organize their the structure of their neighborhoods and the integrity of the neighborhoods? That's what I think is important. So thank you for giving me a moment to sound off. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Next, we have Pat Green.
Thanks for the opportunity to talk, Rebecca. Hopefully I don't upset you too much, but just wanted to share my story. I moved out here about 12 years ago. I had like $1,500 to my name. My wife and I scrapped together enough money to buy a house on Oak Street in Sandpoint. We took everything else we had, bought a condo up at Schweitzer, and we now live down in Sagal because of how prohibitive Sandpoint was to us. We have 2 kids now. It would have been awesome to keep the house on Oak Street and be able to Airbnb that. We weren't able to because we weren't able to get a permit. So that's all I really wanted to say. I think you guys have a tough decision. Obviously, there's legal ramifications for whatever you decide today. But looking at staying in a resort town, I lived in Jackson, Wyoming for a while. I lived in Breckenridge, Colorado, and prices have gone through the roof in those towns. To be able to stay here and keep my kids here, there has to be opportunity for local families to try and keep properties, in the family. So, and there's probably a million different ways to do that, but I think Airbnb is a great option for it. So, thanks.
Thanks, Pat.
That's all we have signed up
That's
to
all.
speak.
Thank you. Anybody else in the audience that did not sign up yet that would like to have an opportunity to speak? Now's your chance. Okay, having none, then I will go ahead and close the public hearing and we'll go into deliberations.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
is there a number that can be applied? Meaning, you get 15 complaints about one property because of parking, noise, traffic. Those are the things that are sort of the language in the thing. I would argue it's changed the integrity of that community, right? It's now in violation of public interest. Then what? Right? Like what's the sort of backstop at that point? Does it all just have to wind its way through the legal system? Meaning, is there a number we can apply that is reasonable because property values are going to go up, taxes are going to go up, right? The nature of neighborhoods, it's reasonable to assume, and I don't know if this is going to happen or not, but it's reasonable that this might change the nature of communities. I could sort of wind my brain around that, but like, then what? Is there a backstop?
When you're asking about a number that can be applied, are you asking about the 35 unit cap?
Yeah. Yeah.
So my thought on that is that the 36th applicant is prohibited from having a short-term rental. And whether you make that number 500, the 501st applicant is prohibited from having a short-term rental. So the first 500 applicants might not have a cause of action, but as soon as you cross that line, then, someone.
Gotcha. And you're pretty confident that, and I don't know if I can ask this question, that will get litigated if there's a number that's baked in.
I can't know
whether
other people are going
Yeah.
to sue or not. So
Gotcha.
Zach, can you clarify like the term practically in that quote that Mrs. Pardini mentioned? You were saying in practice rather than almost.
sure. So the Lava Hot Springs decision, it emphasizes that, the statute says that you can't prohibit short-term rentals, but it also discusses how regulations can amount to a prohibition. So, let's use a hypothetical. If we said that all short-term rentals had to provide 10 off-street parking spots, that would be a prohibition, even though it's disguised as a regulation because there's no unit in the town in the city that could provide 10 off-street parking. So it's examples like that.
Yeah.
I have a question. Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
This is for Zach. So I'm making an assumption that the advice that we've received would in fact come to pass, that if we maintained or even changed the cap, that eventually we would get sued. So my question, and it's speculative on it and its face, but if you could give us perhaps a range of the time and the cost to the city to litigate that thing after we do get sued. Now, this is an assumption, but if, based on your experience, you're capable of giving us a range of costs that the city would bear, because it's not a free ride. We can't just thumb our nose and assume that it comes at no cost to the city on the legal grounds of the thing. So that's what I'm interested in knowing.
I'll answer that in the same way that I answer this question with any client that ever asked me this question. As soon as a lawsuit is initiated, Pandora's box opens. And there really is no way of predicting the outcome in any meaningful way, and then damages and costs and litigation costs. And so the reality is that no, I can't just sit here and give you even a range with any meaningful backbone. I think what's more important is that the city has an obligation to have lawful ordinances. I don't think the city should. I don't think it's a good practice, and for lots of reasons, to say, this is probably illegal, but sue us. Like the city has an obligation to make its ordinances lawful.
Just a clarification. So again, under the assumption that there would be some litigation if we take no action regarding the cap, we would be potentially subject to not only the attorney's costs and any other penalties, but damages to individuals in this town that feel they were harmed.
That would depend on the type of cause of action that was brought. So in the Lava Hot Springs case, for example, they brought a declaratory judgment. So they just brought an action to say this code is unlawful, and that's the only thing that they saw. But attorneys tend to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks, and so they certainly could get creative and bring other causes of action. Who knows? And additionally, in the Lava Hot Springs case, the plaintiffs did not seek attorney's fees, if I recall correctly, but they certainly could have. So my point is they weren't trying to be punitive, but that was just because of their own choice.
Zach, can you clarify who the plaintiffs were in that case?
Sure. So there were individual plaintiffs who had been denied a short-term rental application, and then additionally, it was the Realtors Association. So there were multiple plaintiffs in that case.
Any other questions for staff or any other comments?
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner?
Yeah, I don't know. This feels super scary. I would argue, right? I have no idea what this is going to do to neighborhoods, communities. Maybe nothing, right? Maybe the quote market will figure it out. I don't know. But it would be nice if there were some sort of, you think about like the long-term goals of a community and a city and what that constitutes. And I mean, this could have some seriously unintended consequences. And I don't know what to do about it. Because we got to fit the ordinance inside the law. If the language truly is prohibited versus restricted, why would they use both words? It feels weird.
To the extent that's not a rhetorical question.
That was a question.
Okay.
I can make it rhetorical.
So that's
Okay.
The Supreme Court analyzed the statute.
Yeah.
And the statute provides, find it here. I'll paraphrase. It provides that no ordinance shall prohibit short-term rentals, or it says that ordinances can regulate short-term rentals for the general welfare. And the Supreme Court provides the analysis of what the distinction is between prohibit and regulate, and when regulations cross the line into prohibitions. To be clear, they deliberately express no opinion on what might constitute a reasonable regulation. So that's fair game to litigate, but they do make it clear that prohibitions are, prohibiting the applications of rentals.
And I put the state statute on the screen for you here. Very short.
So from a perspective of the city of Sandpoint, you think about this combined with increased housing density, and then what, right? So I think this is going to be an interesting one to watch over the next, right? This is, I don't know what this one's going to do.
So for what it's worth, our current wait list for non-owner occupied short-term rental permits is, drum roll please, Mandy?
18.
18. So the short-term effect would be those 18 would be brought off the wait list and be allowed to get a permit. Now, an important question, which we don't know the answer to, is how many of those are currently being operated as long-term rentals?
2. 2 that we know of.
You know that.
2 that we know of that I've had conversations with the.
So
The
what is the
property owner.
immediate impact on
Bit of a
the-
trade-off.
the supply of long-term rental housing in Sandpoint? Presuming those two, kick out their tenants and are unhappy with the way the long-term rental is going, then we'd see 2 fewer units. Of course, that's just purely based on what we have on our wait.
Well, and I'd also argue 16 other opportunities that
Opportunities,
are
sure.
now missed.
We also know that there's a lot of non-compliance with our current
Right.
licensing requirement, just from what we see online through our subscription site. So we've done some enforcement in the last 6 months. Mandy and Katie have sent several letters notifying property owners that need to come into compliance. In other words, get a permit or license. So another, combined with the second agenda item tonight, which stands to provide opportunities for modest increases in density and smaller lot development and smaller, housing types in Sandpoint. One of the ways to look at this is the market tends to respond to signals that the market sends, right? So you could say, okay, worst case scenario, 1,000 of our 3,000 or 4,000 houses in Sandpoint are converted to short-term rentals tomorrow and tenants are kicked out. Well, what's the market signal in response to that? Is there demand for 1,000 additional bedrooms every night in Sandpoint? If not, then there's going to be 950 vacant short-term rentals for the next 6 months. And those owners are going to quickly realize that rents are skyrocketing for long-term rentals because there's 1,000 people who have recently been evicted from the house. This is an extreme, absurd example I'm giving, but if you said there's 50, let's say 50 local families get evicted, they're now out there on the market looking for long-term housing. The landlords for long-term housing see there's excess demand, they're going to start raising their prices. Meanwhile, there's 50 additional short-term rentals on Airbnb that are sitting vacant every night. Or the occupancy rate's not at a level that it is profitable to continue operating as a short-term rental. So generally speaking, we live in a market economy, and as the supply of STRs, let's say, expands modestly in response to our elimination of the cap, that will have an effect on the occupancy rates of other STRs in Sandpoint, just by the fact that there are only so many people coming to Sandpoint looking for short-term rental lodging. So when there's more competition, it will affect the profitability of operating a short-term rental. And on the other end, the decrease in availability of long-term rental housing will affect the rents in the long-term rental housing market. And over time, that should equilibrate as owners realize, oh, I can get a long-term renter here tomorrow, but I've only had 3 nights out of the last month on the Airbnb market. Again, these are all hypotheticals, but just, you express like a concern, like it's probably not going to be as dramatic as like a sizable percentage of our housing market is converted to short-term rental lodging.
I get it. It's not an overnight thing.
Yeah.
It's a maybe over 5 or 10 year thing. And in retrospect, feels like it was overnight. Because, right, there have been some sort of backstops up till now. And again, I don't know whether this effect's going to happen or not, but suddenly, like, Sandpoint gets marketed in the right circles as an opportunity for outside investment, right? Because it's a short-term rental opportunity. So you see a lot of outside money come in, institutional investment. There's no real backstop to stop that. So, with this, and again, it's going to be one to watch, we may be talking about deliberalizing ADUs in a couple years or something. You know what I mean? Like, again, it's not an overnight thing, but this one could have some effects.
It also could actually enhance the ability for the city to collect business licenses and taxes and stuff like that,
Yeah.
because people aren't going to be trying to kind of slide under the radar as much either.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's important
Yep.
to listen to stories you've heard from over the last 2 meetings from local families that depend on STR revenue as a way to stay here as well. I don't know if I haven't, Mandy might know better, but how many of our STR owners are out-of-state corporations versus local families and local property owners, local businesses that manage STRs for residents? That's something that, we don't have clear numbers on necessarily. But we've heard plenty of examples, and we do know that many of our STR operators are just people who live in Sandpoint, who have a second place here, have an accessory dwelling unit, and want to make a little money on the
That's
side.
not something we can even talk about from
No,
a
we
regulatory
can't
standpoint,
regulate
right?
that.
Can't regulate
I got you.
No, and I would just add that this brings me back to the opening comments. I mean, here you see on the screen that cities have reasonable regulations in order to protect the integrity of residential neighborhoods. That's the legislator telling you that, yes, these do have an effect on the integrity. Now go ahead and regulate as you see fit to deal with the integrity, but you can't regulate it any more than a single family home. That's what the last sentence says. So we're left right back to square one. What does that mean and how do we do it? So noise and parking came down to what we were looking at, until such time as we can think of something else that is a reasonable regulation that fits within this.
Wayne, I thought of another question, Matt. Thank you. Legislation can change. Court cases can be reversed or, clarified over time. My question has to do with sort of vested rights of those who have a permit for a short-term rental in this town, subject to renewal every year. If laws, court decisions, or our regulations within the confines of those other two things change, that can legitimately further restrict short-term rentals in some manner. I don't know what, but I'm just thinking theoretically. People who obtained a permit under, let's say, what we're talking about tonight, if this changes or the structure on which this sits changes, can the city review and decide those renewals on the basis of then the current rules or court cases or laws, or are we bound to honor a vested permit?
I mean, I think that would completely depend on the nature of the change. The way I'll answer that is that the U.S. Supreme Court cautions judges to not make decisions on regarding what the legislature might do, because you just can't anticipate that. And then with respect to Supreme Court decisions, I don't think you can make a decision on what the Supreme Court might do. You need to make a decision on precedent. You can make anticipatory decisions, but shouldn't be amending code on what the Supreme Court might do or what the legislature might do.
No, I'm not, sorry, I must have been unclear. So if the law changes, like it might soon, but through some feedback loop 3 years from now, it changes again and it enables communities to be more restrictive. Okay. That's the presumption I'm making. The law has changed. Can we would then change our rules to reflect what the law then would allow us to do, restricting or regulating short-term rentals. Under a new set of regulations, are we then able to review all current permits and say, nope, you can't do that?
I think I understand what you're asking, and that completely depends on the nature of the change in the law.
Okay, but it's possible. I guess what you're saying is if for some reason they said you can limit it to 10% of the housing in your community, because I'm making it up, of course, And 10% of the housing in this community goes back to 50 units, let's say, at the time. So suddenly, and maybe this isn't even worth talking about, but if the legislature says you can do what we're doing now, 3 years from now, they just reverse themselves because of.
I understand your question.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So can we take the other 450 people who have permits and say, forget it?
So the one thing that's nice about that ordinance, the way it's worded today, to inoculate yourself against having something endure past changing cycles of rules, is that's an annual permit.
Right. So there is no vesting. That's my.
So I'm not being an attorney. I'm not going to say there's no vesting. What I'm saying is that one thing that helps in that regard, because, it's probably going to be a fact-based situation depending on what laws could be in place. But one thing that helps us as a community is that this permit is an annual permit. So you're not, if you have a permit, it expires at the end of the year. The next year, the next time you get the permit, you gotta apply for that permit under the rules they'll lay before you. You can't say, well, I had one before, so.
Right.
I go in to get my driver's license and, you're allowed to get it when you're 18, but no, I want to get it when I'm 16 because that's the way it was before. No. You have to, the rules today are what they are today. So that helps a little bit. So, if all of a sudden the law changed midstream in June and we have a bunch of permits, everybody's wondering, can I operate like this? Well, we've got some ordinance tweaking to do. And anyway, so I think it's a great question. I just think that, the best way for me to help with an answer is to just rely on the fact that these things don't endure like a subdivision plat. For example, that can go on for years and years and years, or a CUP that can go on for a long, long time. It's not that.
Right. It's a different animal. Right.
A different animal. It's an administrative permit that has a short shelf life.
Right. So as the landscape gets clearer and things get settled, or they continue to change, we can change with them, or we have to.
That's right.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments? Just real quick, what if a neighborhood gets together and says, we don't like your definition of integrity? And they come back to the city and say, we feel we want this added or this taken out, or.
Sure, like any process in the municipal code, if city council directs us to amend a code, absolutely we'll snap a smart salute and get to work on it and bring it through the process. That's typically how that works. So yeah, these codes can and should be, changed as the community value expression changes.
But what could you possibly put in the code to mitigate it?
I just.
Right? I have no idea.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I struggle with that as well. I mean, I've poured over that section of state code and it's pretty tight. So
I've got something. I mean, we have standards that protect neighborhood character and integrity. They're called our setbacks, our building heights, our what type of uses are allowed, but we can't apply different standards to STRs. But STRs have to follow all those standards. Those standards exist to protect neighborhood character and integrity. What we can't do is say all residential neighborhoods must be inhabited by full-time year-round residents.
Sorry.
yeah, we're talking about these are the occupancy of structures that are regulated otherwise.
Yeah, so say like you have like 3 blocks, it's near, it's like on Elm, Merton, whatever, over in that area by the wastewater treatment plant. And they said, hey, we want to create a homeowners association. We want to write CC&Rs that prohibit them. Could you do that?
I think this question came up at a last hearing, Zach. Are HOAs allowed to ban short-term rentals in the state?
Yeah, well, I know they are right now, but what I mean is, could you like start forming like little micro HOAs so that or here and there? I mean, most people don't want them.
Yeah, right.
I think my answer to that is that's not the city's business.
Okay.
People can try to form HOAs and solve this issue themselves however they want. But that's kind of not up to the city.
I'm just thinking of like ways that small groups of people could organize themselves outside of the city's purview in order to kind of push back in the way that seems like some residents want to.
I mean, I don't mean to sound flippant, but the real way to enact change on this particular issue is to
talk to your
legislature.
Yeah,
I mean,
no,
that's
true.
really the way to make this change. This is entirely statute. So this can change every single legislative session if they wanted to. There are no constitutional rights involved here.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay,
All right, let's vote.
no, I'm good. I think, ready for a motion? Boy, all of a sudden I'm quiet.
Would it help if I put some options up on the screen for you?
Thank you.
Just say, I think, it's kind of cliche, the hands are tied thing. You can say that, but I think this does seem pretty black and white in terms of what the state code says, the recent case, legal counsel, recommendation. So I think it's, it'd be hard for me to say, okay, let's go to battle against the state of Idaho as the city of Sandpoint Planning and Zoning Commissioner. So, that's where I'm coming from. So I'm kind of moving towards passing this along to city council.
Well, I'll make a motion. I recommend that we submit a recommendation to the city council to adopt the proposed amendment to the code as presented. Sandpoint City Code 3-12 is presented.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Okay, then we'll have a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Torpy,
Yes.
Commissioner Mitchell,
Yes.
Commissioner Weber,
Yes.
Commissioner Banner,
Yes.
Commissioner Simmons.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, motion passes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, do we need a break for just a minute before we move on to the second? Yeah. I see a break over there.
Okay. Thank you.
5-minute break. Yeah. Okay, next is the second public hearing and recommendation to amendments to Sandpoint City Code Title 9-1-3 definitions, 9-4-1-3 residential single-family development standards, and 9-4-2-3 residential multifamily development standards pertaining to the maximum lot coverage standards, minimum lot size in the RM zone, and density standards in the RM zone. Again, if you wish to testify, please complete a sign-up form and hand it to staff. Because this is not a quasi judicial hearing, if there are members of the public on Zoom who wish to speak, they will take a remote testimony on this matter. We will begin with staff presentation, followed by commissioners' questions. Then we will open the public hearing for testimony. After the public hearing has been closed, we will proceed with commission deliberation and a recommendation decision. I will now yield the floor to Community Planning and Development Director Jason Welker.
Thank you, Vice Chair. This is another long-running amendment that we've been working on now since September. I think this is the 5th time we've come with versions of this to you. Slow is steady, and we are taking this one very slow, and I'm very happy we are, because I think it's coming to you in a very polished form at this point. As with many of the amendments we bring, this one started with a very small goal in mind. I'm reminded of our overhaul of 9.6, the off-street parking requirements earlier this year. I think we started out with, bringing some modest parking requirements for our commercial zone back into code, and we ended up with a complete overhaul of 9.6 that went into several other components of off-street parking. Similarly, this code, which I'll put on the screen here for you before we jump into our short PowerPoint, likewise started out with some fairly modest amendments in mind. And when we got into it, we found just many other changes that needed to be made. So despite that, the three focuses of the amendment are what was introduced by the vice chair. And the focus of my PowerPoint here is going to focus on the big three substantive changes to the code. So when you look through and I'm just going to scroll through it here so you can see there's actually a lot of red in this. Most of the changes you're going to see in the code in terms of strike-throughs and additions are not substantive. Okay, we'll just look at one example here, and I need to call this one out too because I think we might have made a very last-minute change just to clarify a Scribner's error here. For example, this is the allowed uses in our residential single-family zone. We've not changed the allowed uses in our residential single-family zone, so we have improved the table to make it easier to read. Okay, so you'll see that duplex on a single lot. It was a little fuzzy whether duplexes on a single lot were allowed, but after like 5 or 10 minutes of trying to distinguish between the difference between the definitions of a duplex and an attached housing and a townhouse, we discovered that in fact duplexes on a single lot are not allowed in the residential single family zone. So we added that just to make it very clear. So it's not unclear. Okay, so that's an addition, but that's not a change. Duplexes were not previously allowed on a single lot in the multifamily zone. We also have we clarified the definitions of attached housing in a duplex. An attached house for the purposes of our code is a single family house on its own lot that is attached to another single family house on its own lot. You'll see that those are not permitted in the residential single family zone. Except we scroll down, and what we've also done in this table is distinguished between original substandard lots of record and standard lots, which are larger than 5,000 square feet. So we do have a handful of, in our RS zone, smaller lots, 3,500, 3,600 square foot lots. When you get down to those smaller lot sizes, some of the uses not allowed on larger lots are allowed. So attached housing is allowed. You can imagine a townhouse type situation where individually platted single family attached houses are permitted on narrow 25-foot wide 3,500 square foot lots, but not in the larger 5,000 and larger square foot lots in town. So this isn't a change. I just want to show you this because it's not actually a change. We're just clarifying where things are allowed and were previously allowed. So we also started out this amendment looking at our lot coverage maximums and our building footprints. But in so doing, we dramatically cleaned up our setback code. None of our setbacks are changing from what is in our current code. There were plenty of conversations about it, but we have dramatically improved the language around our setbacks. So I'm just giving you an example here. These are all this red language in here. These are not changes. We've moved things around. We had what were called general exceptions and specific exceptions to our setback code. It was extremely difficult to read. So we've really cleaned up how the setback sections in both RS and RM read so that it's just much more digestible now. Okay. So I wanted to bring that information forward for you because the focus of our presentation is going to be on the big three changes that we're making that are substantive. Okay, so I'm assuming you've all had a chance to read through or to scroll through the red line version. So I got to stop sharing my screen because I only shared one page, and I'm going to share it again with my whole screen. And we're going to look at the presentation I prepared that goes into the substantive changes. So we'll get into that.
Before we switch gears, Can I ask a question? How is it determined that attached housing did not mean a duplex, like was not actually including a duplex?
A duplex is the smallest form of multifamily housing. So we already had distinguished between like attached housing and multifamily housing. So multifamily being generally at an apartment on a single lot with not individual private owners, but rather renters is typically. So duplex, and for the purposes of our code, is an attached dwelling unit, two dwelling units, two attached dwelling units on a single lot, meaning you have one owner, a single owner. And Bill can probably.
I would just add too that every way we read the code, it didn't seem like anything could go on a RS lot unless it was a single house. If you have multiple houses at play or multiple lots at play, then you've got a different scenario. And if you have a substandard lot, you have a different scenario. We kept coming back to, was a duplex allowed? And the answer we kept on coming up with was no. So you're allowed to do a house on a lot in the RS zone with the exceptions that you see there. That's a tremendous distinction from the RM zone where lots of things are allowed. Every other housing type that we have is allowed there. But in the RS zone, you can do a house unless you've got a substandard lot or you have multiple lots at play.
Okay.
It was torturous to read the last code because it would establish that something is not allowed, and then the notes would suggest that maybe it is, or vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
But every time we read through it, we kept coming up with the same answers, even though it was torturous to get there.
Okay.
So I don't think we're changing anything. We're just clarifying it.
Sure.
Making
Yeah,
it
no,
easy
I
to
think
read.
that's interesting because it was always my perception that it was like a duplex was allowed in that category because of the language. So you could have a duplex and an ADU and
Attached multifamily.
3 units because it kind of getting to the building code definition.
Which is different than a planning and zoning definition.
right.
And that, in fact, at one point, just last week, I was trying to see if there's a way we could just bridge a gap. And I was reminded quickly that no, there's a reason why the building code is different from the planning and zoning code. We're just talking about these things in different contexts and different methods.
Okay.
So attached housing is pretty clearly defined in our zoning ordinance, as Jason described earlier.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair.
No, it was very difficult, but we hopefully will present the community with something that's a lot easier to understand.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so getting into our presentation here, the reason for this presentation is not simply to remind you of the 3 changes we're proposing, the 3 or 4 more substantive changes we're proposing, but to go back into the reasoning behind it. Why are we here? What was the impetus for this? Why in 2025 is the city staff proposing a decrease in minimum lot sizes and a modest increase in density standards and building footprint standards? It's because last year we adopted the comp plan. After 4 years of development, this body recommended adoption of a new comprehensive plan to the city of Sandpoint, to the city council. That comp plan contained multiple goals and objectives that our proposed amendments tonight are in the spirit of. Your staff report laid out all of those goals and objectives in quite a lot of detail. So for the public, for yourselves, if you haven't read that, please go back and look. It goes through all the goals and objectives that these amendments support. But this presentation is going to give kind of an overview of how we are trying to address a problem that's being experienced nationwide using the levers that we have to pull at the planning and zoning level in the city of Sandpoint. Okay, so the big idea here is that these amendments are a local incremental step to enable more attainable housing in Sandpoint. These relate to the implementation of the comprehensive plan, and these are kind of the 4 areas that we're going to look at. Lower barriers to small-scale infill development in the form of small homes, ADUs, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, cottages, although there's no change to our cottage code tonight. Reduce per-unit land costs by allowing more homes on the same land. Loosen building footprint maximums to enable more living space per square foot of real estate, and increase supply and choice so price pressure is not forced into a small set of housing types. This is kind of a classic picture here on the right that illustrates, and I believe a version of this is in our comprehensive plan. It illustrates kind of what's described as the missing middle housing, which local ordinances can either make more or less difficult to implement. So looking at sort of the big picture here, the macro trend, this is nationwide. So if we go back to the 70s and we index the wage rate in the United States and the cost of housing, you can see kind of the core of the problem that we're facing. Housing costs, and this is not a surprise to anybody, have risen at 73% more rapidly than wages have in the United States. So average hourly earnings have grown over the last 50 years, but housing prices have grown significantly more, 1.7x. So if we look a little more how that looks to actual families, this is the ratio of the average home price to the average family income today. You might say, well, that's actually a lot smaller. It hasn't gotten as bad over the last 40 years in this case as the previous graph might have indicated, because that should be a lot higher ratio of home prices to household income. But one of the things to understand is that since the 80s, the average number of income earners in a household have increased. We've seen far more participation from women in the labor force, for example. That's contributed to more people working more hours, but finding housing even less affordable. So this would be an example would be today with the ratio of 5, if the average household's $400,000, if the average house costs $400,000, the household income for somebody owning that house is $80,000, 1/5. Okay, that's up. That ratio has increased as home prices have grown faster than household income. So despite people working more, despite more income earners in every household, housing has become less affordable. Here's another important one that we came across in our preparation of this. As a component of the overall consumer price index, housing has grown faster than anything else, or not anything else, but it's grown more than the overall CPI. So you say, well, every prices always goes up. Housing is no different. We know this. We've all experienced this. We have realtors in the room. They see this every day. All of us have struggled to buy a house in our lives. Largely that's because home prices, shelter prices have risen 28% faster than the rest of the prices included in our consumer price index over the last 40 years. So while local policy cannot control inflation, we can remove barriers to local supply. And that's what we're proposing with these amendments. Looking locally, this is just some net migration data just over the last 4 years. So from 2020 to 2024, 7,330 people moved into Bonner County. The total population change was 6,846 because the natural change, we actually saw our local population decrease during that time. So that includes out migration and, deaths exceeding births during that time. But that's real pressure. In 4 years, we saw our population increase. What's the total population of Bonner County? 50,000, 55,000? We're talking on the level of a 13, 14% increase in population in Bonner County. Do you think the housing stock's grown by 14%? No. So how does that translate in the local housing market? This is what it looks like at the state of Idaho, because it's not just a Bonner County problem. The last quarter century, Idaho's population has grown close to 40%. Okay, but the house price in Idaho has grown by 300%. So that's purely a function of demand increasing faster than supply. It's as simple as it gets. When supply cannot keep up with demand, we see families get pushed out. That's a big part of what we're talking about here. So the chart here, this one's powerful, right? Why is that orange line growing so much more steeply than the blue line? It's because the amount of money people moving to Idaho with far exceeds the amount of money that native Idahoans have. So they can drive the prices up, and who pays for who's the loser in that situation? It's the local population that can't afford to buy housing. And you probably, you can look at our local housing market, right? What's the housing type that we saw implemented in Sandpoint in the last, let's say in the COVID years, in the years following COVID? Large lot, single family. Who was that target? Who was that housing type for? Not local buyers. You're talking mostly out-of-state money who come here looking for a large lot, single family, 8,000 square foot lot, 3,200 square foot house with a 2 or 3 car garage. Okay, not affordable to local people. But it comes back to the market responding to the demand that's there. And when supply doesn't keep up with demand, you see that price rise. Okay, so is there evidence that increase in supply of housing can promote more attainable, more affordable housing? Well, there is. So there's been plenty of studies on this. Supply growth reduces competitive pressure on existing rentals. Okay, so you get more rental housing come on the market, helps reduce competition for renters among landlords. Rent increases were greatest where supply was most constrained, and building more homes is pro-renter and pro-affordability. There's quite a lot of studies. So metro areas that added more housing experienced slower rent growth, with the largest benefits showing up in older, more affordable buildings. So enabling small scale, more units per acre development helps the market produce more attainable rents over time. Some more evidence from studies here. Increases in housing supply lead to modest decrease in citywide rents. Review finds supply increases, reduce rents or slow rent growth. New buildings can lower rents in nearby buildings. New market rate construction can reduce demand pressure for lower cost units by creating moves up the chain. So zoning that blocks feasible infill shifts demand onto smaller pool of homes, raising prices and rents. The demand is going to come and the price will rise. The only way we can mitigate that is by allowing supply to increase at a rate that keeps up with demand. So what are we talking about doing in Sandpoint to encourage that?
Is all that research done on rental properties, or is that also single family units?
Yeah, that's market rate, single family and multifamily.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so getting back to what we can do locally, the next 4 slides go through the 4, I think there's 4 slides coming up that go through the 4 amendments we're proposing that can provide some supply response over time to the demand pressures that we see. The first one is minimum lot sizes. So in our RM zone, which makes up about half of our residential zoning in Sandpoint, it's the blue area on our map. The rest, of course, being the single family zone. In the RM zone, we're proposing allowing the creation of new lots that are the same size as most of the lots created in the RM zone 100 years ago, which is 3,500 square feet. That's a 25 by 140 square foot lot. When you put the lot layer on our GIS map, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these lots all over Sandpoint. The problem is we don't allow them to be created anymore. So basically reverting to the lot size that was allowed when Sandpoint was platted a century ago could have several benefits. And to give you an illustrative example, I used one 14,000 square foot lot here. This is about a third acre, a little less than a third of an acre in the RM zone. If the landowner, the owner of that property thought, okay, I'm going to try to solve the local housing problem. I'm going to come into City Hall and see if I can subdivide my land. I'm going to do a short plat and create new lots and build some new housing here to provide local worker housing. Our current code says, okay, you have 14,000 square feet. Your minimum lot size is 5,000, so you can create 2 7,000 square foot lots. And Bill and I did the research on this just yesterday, actually. Right now, the square foot land value in Sandpoint is around $23, which is about $1 million an acre for a residential property in Sandpoint. So that 0.32 acre lot has a market value of around $320,000. So they can come in and create 2 new lots or 2 lots out of that 14,000, which have market value of around $160,000. Okay, so let's assume you can build a house and an ADU on each lot. You're now down to $80,000 per dwelling unit for land cost. Okay, and that's the maximum density you'd be allowed to build on if you do single family on those 2 7,000 square foot lots. So you can kind of, see the problem there, right? You're saying before you even buy any sticks or concrete, you're $80,000 into your project, $160,000 for each of your 7,000 square foot lots. Under the proposed amendment, we're saying, okay, let's go back to the lot sizes allowed a century ago. That same property owner could create 4 lots, each which could be developed with a house and ADU. So in that third of an acre, you're allowing up to 8 dwelling units, 4 primary, 4 accessory, and it dramatically reduces the land cost per dwelling unit. So you think, well, if this is densification. It is. This will change the character of the neighborhood. It will. It will. But what's the trade-off? And what's the vision of our comp plan? If we want to bring per house land costs down, if we want to promote affordability, a $320,000 piece of land with a single house on it is not affordable.
Can I just say that, this is a low estimate as well, because if you're talking about buying if you're talking about buying a piece of land in an RM zone in Sandpoint, in between Division and Boyer, you're gonna have to buy a structure as well and tear it down.
Mm-hmm.
So these costs, if you can't subdivide, dramatically increase as well. So it's not just going to be 80,000 if you can only subdivide into 2. It's really going to be, you're buying a $350,000 structure that you have to tear down, you have to dispose of before you can even get to buying sticks and concrete.
Right. So we're, again, going back to the message at the bottom here. Density is not the goal, feasibility is. We make infill development less feasible under our current regulations financially. So the graph just shows you, the per housing unit land cost under our current, and this is, again, just one example. It's not like that is the actual cost out there, but just using that example there. Okay, another amendment we're proposing is a moderate increase in the density allowed on lots at each size range in the RM zone. So again, we're only talking about the blue portions of our zoning map, the residential multifamily zone. This is the part of Sandpoint, central Sandpoint, parts of West Sandpoint that are already zoned for multifamily housing, but we have regulations on the books that make it quite costly and unfeasible to do multifamily housing. So the blue line on this graph is the number of units allowed on different lot sizes under our current code. The orange line is the number of units, dwelling units allowed on each lot size under the proposed amendment. And this goes on up to half an acre, 21,000 square feet or something. And beyond that, we have language around 1,000 square feet per additional code or per additional dwelling unit or something. So it's fairly modest. Yes, we're doubling the allowed amount of dwelling units on a 5,000 square foot lot from 1 to 2, but beyond that, we're going up by 1 at each band of lot sizes. So the second amendment we're proposing here. Smaller lots can be created and every larger lot can support more homes. Amendments allow land to support more households without expanding the city footprint. Remember that demand's coming whether we accommodate it or not. It's either going to be communicated locally as higher prices or more sprawl. If there's not supply of housing in Sandpoint, we see subdivision happen in the county. We see 20s divided to 10 and 10s divided by 5s and 5s down to 2s or 1s. So these are people who are not going to be like, oh, well, I got to move out into a 2-acre lot out in the county. No, that's why we see subdivision requests coming through in Bonner County at unprecedented rates, because the cities have been unable to accommodate through our available infill capacity. Okay, there's one modest change being proposed for the single family zone. Most of our amendments are in the multifamily zone. Okay, the change we're proposing for the single family zone is a loosening of the max building footprint standard, which currently says no building footprint shall exceed 35% of the lot size. And this is the one that we spent the most time on over the last 4 or 5 meetings. This commission gave just such great feedback, and Bill and I are really comfortable with where we landed here. We're keeping the 35% building footprint max for 2-story structures, but allowing single story or up to 18 feet to exceed that, so that those ADUs, those backyard cottages, become more feasible for many people who are currently at 28, 27, 29, 30, 31% lot coverage. Say, I want to put a 600 square foot detached, apartment in my backyard for my mother-in-law, or to run as a short-term rental or to run as a long-term rental. Whatever their incentives are, we have regulations that make it impossible for dozens, if not hundreds, of property owners in Sandpoint to do that right now, just because of the building footprint max. But we are not increasing our max impervious. So there's been concerns about stormwater and things like that. We currently allow development in Sandpoint to go up to 70% of impervious surface. We're proposing that we no longer tell property owners what your impervious surface can and cannot be. We're saying if you want to put more living space on your land, you can. Because previously we're saying, well, you can pave your backyard if you want to, but just don't put a place for someone to sleep back there. So there is a loosening of our regulation over building footprints. But the big concern on this board was large 2-story structures looming over people's backyards, looking down into their private space and blocking air, light, and open space. So that's where the single-story compromise, the single-story solution, Bill is a brilliant planner. He came up with the single-story allowed to exceed the 35%. So that's something for you to consider here tonight, whether that's a good outcome. In the RM zone, we are proposing just eliminating the current 40% building footprint cap, and this ties very well with our modest increase in allowed units per lot size. Because if a developer or builder wants to now put let's say a duplex on a 5,000 square foot lot, which is not unreasonable, good luck fitting 2 dwelling units on 40% of your 5,000 square foot lot. So now they can use more of that 75% max impervious, keeping in mind that there are still off-street parking requirements for multifamily development. So there's no way that a multifamily development can consume 75 or 70% of a lot, because they absolutely need off-street parking for off-street development, for multifamily development in Sandpoint. So there's no scenario in which a multifamily building could consume 70% of a lot. There would need to be some accommodation for hardscaping, a driveway at least somewhere to access a parking facility. So this increase in the max building footprint allows additional dwelling units to be accommodated on site, prevents new units from being forced into smaller footprints, provides flexibility in building layout while meeting parking requirements. So more living space and more homes can be built in the same land area. Going back to our ability to allow the market to respond to the demand that there is. Okay, Bill asked this slide to be added as well. When we think about neighborhood character and how these amendments might affect neighborhood character, we looked back and, we aren't proposing changes that will allow new housing types in the single family zone. The single family zone still only allows single family detached housing. Attached and I can tell you can count on two hands how many substandard original lots of record there are in the RS zone. Most of those long, skinny lots are in the multifamily zone. There's one part of town over around 6th and Boyer, kind of in the Syringa Cyclery area, where there are a couple of blocks where there's some RS zoned substandard lots of record, narrow, skinny lots, 3,500 square feet. So we're not proposing the creation of new lots smaller than 5,000 square feet in the single family zone. That's the minimum today. That's what we're proposing we keep it at. And in the RM zone, the creation of smaller lots and the increase in building footprint will allow for more of the variety of housing types other than single family that our comp plan says we should be looking for ways to encourage. So limiting the types of housing allowed based on underlying zoning preserves character of existing neighborhoods while allowing for modest increases in density as envisioned in the comprehensive plan. I like this picture in the background. You got a little quaint single family house next to a triplex, but it's not dramatically different in character. Okay, just last slide here, and then we're going to open it up for questions. Going back to what we can do locally, we're not going to solve the affordability crisis that America faces or that Sandpoint faces by amending our code today. We're not going to solve the affordability crisis. These are small, targeted, incremental changes we can make that are modest and don't dramatically change the character of our residential neighborhoods, but will allow enable is probably the right word, make feasible small scale infill that is currently infeasible under our standards. This will reduce the embedded land cost per unit and expand options for local households. And I'd just like to leave you with this. I mean, our guiding principle here is not to provide more housing or to enable the provision of more housing for rich out-of-state developers or rich out-of-state buyers. But what happens when home prices double over 3 years at Sandpoint? Who suffers from that? What about our kids? What about our grandkids? What about recent graduates that want to stay in Sandpoint, but there's absolutely no way they can get into this market? The developer community has been quite responsive in the last couple of years as the 8,000 square foot, 8,000 square foot lot, 3,200 square foot house has proved to be more challenging to sell. Demand has softened for the large lot single family home in Sandpoint, but demand is still rising for small lot, single family attached and detached housing at Sandpoint. And more of the pre-op meetings we've been having in the last year are property owners and developers that are interested in doing something innovative and unique, not like what we saw in the COVID and post-COVID years, large lot single family. You won't see much more of that in the years ahead. So how can we amend our code locally to enable and to make feasible more of the small lot single family? These are the three or four things that we've identified for doing that. And it's right out of our comprehensive plan. So I'll stop there and let me know if you have any questions.
Any questions for staff? Yes, sir.
I do. Thank you. I just want to make sure I understand. 941, I believe it's 3D. Subpart 2, no structure on a lot shall exceed the following height limits as measured from the finished grade, and there's a table. And then it says, for the purpose of this section, any horizontal area of a building or structure that is located below any portion, blah, blah, blah. Does that mean that if you have a building that has, say, half of the it's a building, and half of it measured from the average grade up is over 18 feet, and the other half is not, that you only measure the projected area onto the ground where it's greater than 18 feet to apply the 35% maximum? Is that what that means? Or is it any part of the building that is over 18 feet means the whole building gets counted toward the 35 feet?
Well, this structure might be, this is from our presentation last time. Is this an illustrative example of what you're describing here? The garage, the little apartment above the garage, certainly that's taller than 18 feet. But the rest of this house is not taller than 18 feet. So are you asking whether this entire house would be considered 18 feet tall?
Is it all
or
the same
30
structure?
feet?
Is it the same
Yeah, it's an
structure?
attached garage with an apartment above it,
Oh.
but the rest of the house is not 2 stories.
Okay.
So is
okay.
this a 2-story house? Is this a good example of what you're asking?
So I'm reading this correctly, that you only take that portion of the house,
Well, let's go read the code again. Let's go.
projection of it on the ground. It's not any part of the house means the whole house.
For the purpose of this section, any horizontal area of a building or structure that is located below any portion of a roof or building element whose height exceeds 18 feet. So going back to this, would you read that to mean this portion of the house is considered to be taller than 18 feet?
I'm assuming it's not.
I don't think it would be.
So
We would interpret that to mean your garage is 18 feet tall.
Okay.
But the rest of your house is not. So
Okay.
we're not applying the entirety of your house towards the 2-story
okay.
building
Great.
footprint.
Can I go on just for a second? Okay. So in subsection D, where am I? Subsection D.
Those houses are across the street from each other, aren't they?
Mhm.
They are.
Amazing.
Easy
Peasy, right?
Exactly.
Let's, I'm gonna come back, because I want to
Okay.
find my section so I can read it. Sorry, go ahead, next.
It might be easier if you have a page number too. I don't know if there's.
I
a page
know, I just have my, it's 9413, subsection C2. And my comment is, I suggest to remove what's inside the parentheses, because you give examples of impervious surface. And my concern there in that parenthetical reference is that it may suggest that it's limited to those things that you've named, whereas you've already defined impervious surface elsewhere. And it seems redundant to then give examples of impervious surface in 3C2, because it may limit for the application of that requirement what is impervious for the application of that requirement. See what I mean? I mean,
I think that's a question for Bill. What do you think?
We could introduce the word such as.
such as, okay.
Right. The point, sometimes when you have a code that gets to be, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 pages, it's hard to avoid repeating things sometimes. So we're careful to try to make sure we include the same examples, parenthetically, but for clarity, writing the word such as helps a lot to suggest, look, these are examples to help the reader or user of the code understand this is kind of what we're talking about.
I agree.
Yeah.
Including seemed to suggest.
Yeah, including things such as, right.
Yeah,
right.
okay.
Just qualifies it.
We're almost there. E3 sub E, it makes reference to street facing, and this is where I get really confused. Street facing garages are prohibited on lots narrower than 37.5 feet in the RS zone.
Good catch.
What?
Good. Excellent question. That's one of those changes that didn't rise to the level of like a major substantive change, but it Perhaps it should have. Bill, do you want to talk a little bit about narrow lots and why we are proposing prohibiting garages, or sorry, it's, yeah, street facing garages on the narrowest lots in Sandpoint?
Why are we limiting garages on super narrow lots in Sandpoint? It just, that the garages become the defining character of the home when the garage occupies the predominance of the front facade. So that's why you have limitations on them.
Well, elsewhere it says the garage, I'm using terms that Reed would probably better speak to, but you got the front of the house, no more than half of the front of the house can be a garage, right? So if you have a 37.5 foot wide lot and you have 5 foot setbacks, you have 27.5 feet, that leaves, I don't know, 14 feet almost for a garage, which I could put my car in a 14-foot, I think, in a 14-foot garage. I mean, I'm not suggesting that the garage take up the whole thing, but why not let the other rules prevail? That is, you can't have a garage more than half the width or the face of your house. And regardless of, and then the setback, you know, regardless of how narrow the lot is. If you can build a garage, why not just be a one-car garage or one-door garage anyway?
I think Bill's trying to say is if you had 10 of those in a row, it would just be 10 garages with no street facing kind of interaction with the community.
You can certainly have it. It's just, we're talking about the RS zone.
It's the RS, yeah, right.
Yeah, so there's, I think this is just in response to the conversations about integrity of this particular place in Sandpoint being that much more sensitive. At least that's what we were interpreting. But that could easily be just removed.
Well,
I
started with asking the question, why?
Can I point one thing out, actually?
Okay.
Garages are allowed on lots 37.5 feet wide.
Right.
They're not street facing garages. They're not allowed on lots narrower than 37.5 feet wide.
Okay, so if it's 35.
Which, keep in mind, the increments that most of our lots in Sandpoint are platted are 25-foot increments or 17.5-foot increments. So it's, you're either a 25-foot lot, you're a 37.5-foot lot. There are exceptions, of course. You could plat a new development in Sandpoint with 30-foot wide lot or 37-foot wide lots, not 37.5. But typically our lots are 25, 37.5, 50, 67.5, whatever it is.
So it was just basically our reading of what the existing form was in the lot pattern that we had. Saying, okay, this we're gonna draw a line, it's gonna be here for clarity, but we don't have to.
Okay, well, no, ask why.
Yeah, it's when you have a 25-foot wide lot,
And
you don't want to see a garage in the front of it.
I want to defer to you. Okay, so that's.
Well, I mean, I would argue that's kind of what we've heard through these meetings is we're talking about some character elements of homes, garages we've talked about on and off, but on a 25-foot wide lot, you take in the setbacks, just make it clear you're not going to put a garage in that home. I even think that one of our meetings, we took a visual tour online of some of the homes that did have the garages, and then the only other part of the home that was made it a discernible home versus just like a storage unit was the fact that it had a second story with a porch. So we were trying to avoid having a code that would promote that conversation. It was rather just, nope, you're just not doing it on a lot smaller than that, knowing that there's just a very small handful of them anyway. That was the rationale behind it. It was just, you got these 25, it was really about the 25 wide lots. Not that we couldn't find something that's 31 feet or 29 feet, but looking at these plats, 25 is probably the number you're going to see. And then it's just infeasible. We want to make it clear. You couldn't do it.
With that, right. If you get down to 25 feet, it's not going to work.
But that doesn't mean this language is perfect either. So if there's a concern there, we could either strike it or.
Well, what I'm hearing is that there's an aesthetic value to having more home and less garage lined up on a street.
Right.
And this is an attempt to, in narrow lots, to, even though it may not occur very often or at all, because of the way lots are laid out already, and they will in the future, you just don't want to see so many garages in such a small place.
Right. That's really what this
They
is
still
about.
have the house. It's, you
It's-
just don't want to see it.
Right.
Okay.
A couple points of clarity as well. It might be less, as much concern as the garage is, it's the hard surfacing required to access a garage. You're going to see not just garages, but an entire, imagine a series of attached single family on their own lots, each with a garage, with a driveway consuming the entirety of the front yard.
Which is going to be set back 25 feet at a
Yes.
minimum.
And not only that, but you've now got the adjacency of those driveways. If you have, let's say you have 10 driveways that are 5 feet apart from each other, the entire row of houses, you've got all that traffic crossing the pedestrian right of way as well. I want to point out this language from our updated substandard non-conforming historic lots of record code. Sorry, there's a lot of words there. Parking access via alleys is not encouraged. We crossed out encouraged and we said required where possible. If alleys don't exist, you cannot have a front-facing garage. You'll have a house without a garage in that case.
Yeah, and I want to be clear. This is not me, Bill, individually saying this is what makes for a good neighborhood. I think that your comp plan points you in this direction. I think our conversations that we've had about neighborhood character point us in this direction. It's a long fought over issue in city planning circles about how do you deal with garages. And I think the code already does a pretty good job of it. This just carries forward that thinking that garages can't predominate, and we're just going to make it really clear. If you're on a really skinny lot, you're not going to have it. You're going to access from the back. It just affects the nature of that experience as you're driving or walking down that street. And it can have a dramatic effect if there's 2 or 3 or 4 of these things strung together, especially when you're considering, like Jason mentioned, the paving of the driveway apron itself.
So if there's an alley,
That's right.
that would apply. Are there any narrow, what we consider narrow lots? Are there any narrow lots that are not on alleys?
Not that I've seen in
Not that I've seen.
Okay.
I mean,
Because people still need.
I'll probably find one tomorrow, knowing how it is.
They're gonna build a driveway
Right.
without a garage and put the car right in the front yard, basically, if they need off-street parking without an alley. So I mean,
Yeah,
okay, that's why I asked the question. Okay.
I think it's a good question, but it's a preservation of neighborhood character more than anything.
Okay. Thanks. Oh, yeah.
Any other question?
In those 2 cases, you got 2 properties that can now build an ADU that couldn't have before.
Assuming they can meet setback requirements, assuming they have, yeah, in theory.
Thereby making their property more valuable. Theoretically, right? Which do we think is going to happen first? The tax assessment of the property value or the building of a new housing opportunity? Meaning, and this is sort of I'm not sure what to do about it, but I could come up with a scenario where property values increase more than affordability. If you're allowed to build more ADUs, which without certain controls, right? And we think about the decision we just made for short-term rentals, man, that could get really bad. And so I might, and I'll extend this to the council, do we want to potentially pump the brakes? Just sort of generally. And I throw it out there, it's a bit of a turd in the punch bowl at this point, but
how does this affect property values? The assessments based on, mostly the
Is it?
assessments based
Maybe I
on
don't know how things
the
work.
built structure, not on the land is relatively a small portion of your property taxes.
Okay. Yeah, maybe no effect. Yeah, there's case studies of ADUs increasing without other controls, and then that doesn't actually alleviate the problem, and they start to rent it above market rates, and right. Meaning, and this is particularly in high demand market.
Clarifying, what does it mean to rent it above market rates, though?
That it's typically, if let's say within that neighborhood something's going for 2,500, they typically go for 28. Again,
If things are going for 2,500, they're not going for 28. They can list it for 28, but they're not going to get a rent.
I got okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry.
I mean, anyway, I'm just saying that there's some potential for unintended consequences is what I'm bringing up.
Yeah, I think there always is.
Yeah.
And I think the reason, and this is precisely why Jason and I got together this week and said, let's add a little to this presentation about macroeconomics so we can remind ourselves of all of the things. If you look at all these things that go into housing affordability, and it's a pie, and you've got 10 different factors that are affecting it, well, there's two of them at the local level we can deal with, zoning and maybe having an aggressive economic development strategy to try to bring jobs, which is definitely also part of our comp plan. So you got these two levers you can use, right? And then all the other stuff is absolutely completely out of our hands.
Yeah.
So are we going to address affordability by moving these two levers? Well, all things being equal, if everything else in the pie is moving that direction, this will help, right? So it's what we can do. It's at our disposal to experiment with this. I think that's why it's so important. We've taken such time with this to think through compatibility issues, because we don't want to shock to the system with completely new building types and densities that are unfamiliar. So unintended consequences, will this have I think Jason said it earlier, will there be additional density? Yes. Will there be additional change? Yes. There will be property owners to take advantage of this and have an extra doorknob, like we've talked about. And I think that's what our comp plan suggests we should be exploring. So there will be unintended consequences.
And I mean, and can I say like that, at least like the backstop, the backstop that we don't have with the short-term rentals is that it's in the RM zone is not everything, right? I mean, it's a limited area where most of the change is going to take place, as opposed to, it's not the footprint of the whole city.
The RM zone occupies a large space of the residential, composition of Sandpoint. It really does. It's a large area. Originally platted, like Jason said, a good portion of it with these small lots. Where our code right now goes to just great lengths to create rules around these things called substandard lots. If you have one, boy, you can do a lot of stuff. If you don't have one, you can't. So this just sort of inverts that and says, well, we're going to stop calling it substandard, just allow it by right again, and see what happens. But it's not the whole of the city. It's going to be in pockets here and there, because you look at the existing housing stock, you see stable neighborhoods. You don't see, blocks and blocks of vacant property. So I don't think there's any, cause for alarm, because it's predominantly built. There's not that many vacant properties. I think we looked yesterday just for how many vacant lots are even on the market. 2, I think we found 3 in the whole city, just vacant lots. So I don't think this is going to be a situation where we're character changing whole blocks at a time. It's going to be a property under here, a property under there, and over time you might see, things start to change and move in that direction. There will be some obvious examples. There's a couple sites on Boyer, for example, that are vacant, that are more prominent, because just by virtue of the number of people traveling on those that you'll see. I imagine those would be more obviously visible to a lot of people. If those property owners decide to take advantage of, like I said, the extra doorknob. We'll see. But it's changing. We can't say we're changing the code and at the same time say there's not going to be any change on the ground. Yeah. We have to. We can say that in non-planning terms, right? I think we have to say that. But I think that's where the policy document, the guiding document, sort of led us to this conversation, and I'm grateful for all the effort that's gone into it. And I think like we've mentioned in, I don't know, maybe 6-8 months ago, there's some work on ADUs that was done by prior staff that sort of fizzled with turnover and things like that. But like to get back to that after we sink our teeth into downtown and commercial A. So it's a way of saying that I don't think we're ever really done. I think we're going to be fussing over this for a while.
I think this is especially poignant after the previous hearing item, but there's some, yeah, definitely some potential impacts that could be in the future. I do think though that the amount of potential housing that could come out of this change would overall be beneficial for the affordability of Sandpoint. And yeah, some out of town developers will probably take advantage of that, but also a lot of locals who own land now or who have family in the area. And it's like they'll also benefit, I think, from creating smaller, more affordable housing in this area. So this will be have a big impact on changing the larger single family 5,000 square foot lots, reducing those down to more affordable kind of micro housing. I mean, I've got clients recently around my age who like all they could build was a 800 square foot house for their primary residence. And they, you know, they invested in more glass and like nicer appliances and things, but that's all they were like, we're not going to ever afford a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house. So we're going to build smaller, and it's just a, you know, different lifestyle than it was 20, 30 years ago and beyond. So I think this could overall, yeah, benefit that group of people who are looking for a home in this area. So my thoughts on like the overall change, a lot of work that's been put into this. Thank you for the back and forth. Appreciate the kind of the incremental growth of the RRS zone and not jumping up totally on that. I think we came to a pretty good solution in the end there. Good thoughts on creating that. Won't like totally have a major impact to the RS zone, which seems to be kind of the, I don't know, prize egg a bit of Sandpoint. Be protecting that neighborhood, but for good reason, because it does have that quality that I think that we kind of strive for. And so I hope we don't, as we move forward, just not losing that quality that does create these beautiful walkable neighborhoods with trees along the sidewalk and not just, you know, driveways. And I think this is really thoughtful. Some thoughtful changes through here. So, all right, that's my little soliloquy on this.
Okay, I'm gonna,
Yeah, just
Time for a public hearing, I
Yeah,
think.
where I'm going, yeah. So, okay, I will now open it up for public hearing, and the rules previously stated for public testimony are still in effect. And so now that we're open, Madam Clerk, do we have anybody that signed up on Zoom or here in the audience?
We'll begin with Rebecca Holland. Okay, with that being said, we have Pat Green.
Just wanted to say,
Can you state your name and?
Pat Green, live in Sagal, Idaho. I'm a realtor in town. I'm actually trustee on the Inland Northwest Real Estate Research Committee. We had our annual meeting today, and with new laws and taxes going into effect in other states, there are a lot of big groups looking at Idaho. I think that's something to consider when you're talking about pumping the brakes on this. The growth is coming either way, and I think we need to deal with it. I mentioned earlier this evening that I lived in Jackson, Wyoming for a while. I had the opportunity to buy a house there. My family convinced me not to for around $500,000. That same house today, in maybe 15 years' time, is worth $8 million. And if you prohibit the growth, and maybe prohibit's not the right word, but if we constrict the growth for housing in Sandpoint, the prices are going to go insane. So that's all I have to say to you. I really think it'd be unwise to pump the brakes on this at this point. So.
Thanks, Pat. Do we have anybody else?
No further speakers.
Anybody else in the audience that would like to comment? You can comment and then sign and provide her with the sheet after.
Certainly will. Hi, my name is Kevin Klunder. I'm a CPA here in Sandpoint, with downtown business owner and a resident of the city of Sandpoint. The city's doing great in looking at affordability and what we can do to reduce land costs, but that's not our only impediment to building. The city has recently increased impact fees, and building fees are a huge impediment to affordable housing and building. So if the city's looking at doing things that would reduce quality of life for a lot of neighborhoods by increasing density, I notice that there's lots of people in this room that are proposing these things that don't live in the city and then choose to live out on acreage in large houses. And to try and impose the city's standards of what people want to live in, the market should dictate that. If I want to build a house with a garage in the front on the street, it's my money. Why shouldn't I be allowed to build the house I want and that meets my needs? So I asked the city to consider working to reduce the fees that we charge people to build a new house so that people can afford to build houses. And yeah, I don't have a problem with reducing the lot size. I think that it's people's lands. They should be able to do what they want within reason and try and reduce the impact on the neighborhoods. So thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you. Anybody else in the audience that would like to speak at this time? Okay, having none, then I will close the public hearing and we will deliberate between our commissioners. Any other comment?
Mr. Vice Chair?
Oh, sorry.
Just a response to Mr. Klunder's comment about impact fees. You might recall that one of the, I think, wise decisions that the Impact Fee Advisory Committee made was to tie the residential impact fee to the size of the construction based on square footage. So while it's true that impact fees for residential did go up for many housing sizes, for the smallest housing sizes, they did actually go down or increase very slightly. So when you get up to the 1,800 square foot, 2,000 square foot range, yeah, we saw a pretty sizable increase. But in that smaller, more efficiency housing size range, the kind of house you're more likely to build on a 3,500 square foot lot, the impact fees increased by quite a bit less, and on the smallest lots did decrease. Sorry, on the smallest houses, yeah, smaller than 1,000 square feet. So, for example, the example that Commissioner Weber gave, you know, that somebody building an 800 square foot house saw no increase or very minimal increase, if any, in their impact fees following the amended fee schedule.
Thank you, Jason. Any other discussion with the or motion?
Can we see the proposed motions?
I'm afraid I didn't prepare any proposed motions for you tonight. But, let's see.
Can use that, the other one.
Probably use the last
Yeah, you can.
set of motions and options.
I would move to make a motion to approve the amendments to Sandpoint City Code Title 9, 1 through 3 definitions, 9413 residential single family development standards, and 9423 residential multifamily development standards pertaining to maximum lot coverage and maximum lot coverage standards, minimum lot size in the RM zone, and density standards in the RM zone as written. Is that
As
written?
The motion is to recommend that the city council approve it.
yes, that's
Yeah.
Yes, recommend to the city council for their vote.
Is there a second to Commissioner Weber's motion?
I'll second it.
Been seconded. Any further discussion? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote. Madam Clerk?
Commissioner Torpe,
Yes.
Commissioner Weber,
Yes.
Commissioner Benner,
Yes.
Commissioner Mitchell,
Yes.
Commissioner Simmons.
No.
Mr. Chair, motion passes.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. We have no old business and no new business. So are there any matters from city staff? We need to be,
Just be ready for some commercial updates coming early next year.
Busy year next year. Like, we've got a lot to do.
Commercial zone, like one.
Commercial A.
Commercial A, storm
Downtown
preservation,
history, or-
downtown, we're
yeah.
gonna open the books on it all. Take a
Yeah,
look.
thanks for forwarding that historic preservation packet. Oh, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I guess we won't meet now until next year, so.
Right.
Yep. Okay, commissioners, any discussion on our part? Okay, if there's no further business, then I would adjourn this meeting at 8:06, 07.
8:07.
Thank you.
Thank you.